Hello there and welcome to The Value of Everything. Okay then, we are going to explore the world of corporate media and journalism. So in this one, I will do a shared thought experiment in terms of what does the media do, how does the media make its money, who's got their vested interests in the corporate media, the decline of the corporate media, and a little bit of stats behind it. When we talk about journalism, we do need to go and investigate the two archetypes of journalism itself, which is Walter Lippmann and John Dewey. Then at the end, I will try and add my own little philosophic thoughts on asking some questions of journalism itself. Where has it gone wrong? Why do the media need to persuade? The relationship of the people and the media, the changes to the landscape, the new competition, and what do we see for the future state of our society and media. Okay, let's try and get the simple stuff out of the way first. What is the media there to do? So there's a couple of aspects to it, but fundamentally the media is there to serve its shareholders by maintaining the value of its share price and returning a dividend yield. This can only happen with its ability to serve its customer as best as it can. Now this leads me on to the customer and how it makes its money. Now obviously there is the people who go out and buy the newspapers and then media and download onto their iPads and things like that. But obviously there is advertisement space which gets sold out to corporations themselves. So not only are they selling content to their customers in terms of news, but also they are selling advertisement space. But essentially, if you are not providing your customer with good quality news or good quality content, then they will disappear, the audience numbers drop, and then eventually your revenue numbers from advertisements will drop alongside it. Obviously, you can provide the advertisement companies good sections of news space or allotted time, but it really boils down to the customer and the quality of the news and the content that you provide. So the revenue element is a fine-tuning between the price that you charge to your customer who absorb the content, the price that you charge to the advertisers, the quality of the content, the amount of advertisement space, but obviously not going too fast to drop off your targeted audience. And obviously the competition out there in the field as well. If you're selling a newspaper for $5 and people can download the same information from the internet, people are going to opt for the lowest price. Okay, so you may be thinking as well, there must be something more to this than just the press interacting with its shareholders, the customers who are consuming, and the customers who are paying for advertisement space. And this is true. You do have big multinational conglomerate corporations which have vested interests. So when I say conglomerates, I mean these massive companies have merged to create even bigger supersized companies. So let's look at the landscape of corporate media in America. In 1983, 90% of the media was owned by 50 companies. Now bring us forward to 2011. The same 90% is controlled by only 6 companies. That is GE, News Corp, Disney, Viacom, Time Warner, and CBS. I do recommend checking out a infographic by Frugal Dad on this. If you Google 90% of the media is controlled by 6 companies, you should find it that way. Okay, so why does the consolidation occur? So in general business terms, consolidation does happen for scalability. If you are in paper print production or studio production, it can be very costly. So to merge with other companies and share the resources, then you do make significant cost savings. However, the cost model has actually evaporated for non-physical distribution, so online distribution of media. I shall go into this in more detail a little bit later on. So there is one more revenue stream, more like a indirect revenue stream, between the press and another customer, which I haven't highlighted just yet. This is the relationship between the owners of the big multinational corporations and the political parties. So here is the transaction. On one side, you do have the power to change political opinion, particularly if you do own a lot of all the media outlets and there isn't too much of a variance of views. So with the power to change opinion, you do have leverage to broker deals with politicians. And if you are a big multinational owner, you may want some favors, you may own other companies itself. So there is the opportunity to pass certain laws which may favor your big multinational corporation. So to condense that down, it is an exchange of changing public opinion for changing corporate law. So with the consolidation of the media conglomerates, the customer is served with low prices of newspaper and news media, but they find that they get less in terms of variety of thoughts and views, particularly when there is a vacuum of criticism of media conglomerates and their connections to power. Okay, so I've pulled out a couple of stats charts in terms of revenues. Now, print revenue of America has really tailed off since obviously the advent of the internet, particularly where we come into, say, 2006. It would have been around about $50 billion of revenue. Now, as time has progressed and it gets to, say, 2011, the revenue stream is going to about maybe the high teens, and as time's progressed from there, it's probably even lower now. This may not be directly related, but there is a significant correlation here, in my opinion. Google's revenue stream in terms of $1 billion has almost replaced exactly the decline of the print media. So it's an interesting statistic to put alongside each other there. There's definitely more stats and charts that you can find about this, but there is a significant decline of the big multinational corporations in terms of their revenue stream. Now, you could say with the advent of the internet and the freedom to share information, that has curtailed the actual media itself, but also it may just be as well about customers choosing different methods of selecting their media. Okay, now we need to look into the philosophy of journalism. For us to do this, we do need to look into Walter Lippmann and John Dewey. So these are guys who are around in the 1900s, really just at the peak points of the Industrial Revolution, with the printing presses really kicking in at full steam and people looking at this power that they're observing, really analysing it and seeing how society is adapting to this power that the media has. So, Walter Lippmann was a famous American writer, reporter, and political commentator. He was the guy to coin certain phrases like stereotype and the Cold War. So he is fairly regarded as one of the most influential journalists of the 20th century, the father of modern journalism. So I've collected a few quotes of his philosophy on journalism just to see if we can encapsulate the man's ideals. So let me begin with Walter has stated that ordinary citizens had no sense of objective reality, and since their ideas are merely stereotypes manipulated at the will by people at the top, deliberative democracy was an unworkable dogma or an impossible dream. Okay, so just let me continue on with a few more quotes just so I can build a picture of the man to you. Within this role, journalists are a link between policymakers and the public. A journalist seeks facts from policymakers, which he then transmits to citizens who form a public opinion. Alright, here is another one from Walter. The function of news is to synergize an event. The function of truth is to bring to light the hidden facts, to set them in relation with each other, and to make a picture of reality on which men can act. A journalist's version of the truth is subjective and limited to how he can construct his reality. The news, therefore, is imperfectly recorded and too fragile to bear the change as an organ of direct democracy. Walter has said that mass men functioned as a bewildered herd who must be governed by a specialized class whose interests reach beyond the locality. Walter has stated that the notion of public competence to direct public affairs is a false ideal. So Walter is a little bit more on the side of the socialist persuasion. He is on the alignment of a intelligentsia who is in control, who knows the best, the philosopher kings who can demonstrate what is the best ideas and put them forth. It's almost as if the journalist does have political power, political persuasion, and does have their ability to persuade the masses as they transmit the information into their interpretation and to feed it into a herdish populace. So there was a man who stood up and debated on many of the books that were released. That was indeed John Dewey. So Walter Lippmann would put out a book and he would write all of his political opinion, and then John Dewey would write his rebuttals in a book which would counter those theories. So John Dewey is an American philosopher, psychologist, and educational reformer. He would take a pragmatic view on education, not so much of the state version that we have now, whereby it's all about memorizing, knowledge retention, and regurgitating. It is essentially about children choosing their paths and teachers facilitating it. He was not an advocate of any type of deliberation. He contended that just letting the discussion go without eliciting facts of any kind and without appealing to common meanings. So John would agree with Walter's assertions that the modern world was becoming too complex for every citizen to grasp all of the aspects. But John, unlike Walter, believed that the public, a composite of many publics within society, could form a great community that could become educated about issues, to come to judgment and arrive at solutions to societal problems. Okay, so I'm going to try and condense that down a bit more. Walter Lippmann would like a elitism broadcast media with strong guided public opinions to persuade the citizens, whilst John Dewey would like individuals to be empowered to have their own thoughts, to cast good judgments on the processes of democracy. So wise philosopher kings versus individual empowered people. So interestingly, I am probably part of John Dewey's vision. People who are trying to theorize, look into, study, learn as they go along, pass on information as they seek it, and broadcast it out. That is the vision of John Dewey, to empower the individual. Obviously, this only works if that person has good judgment. If they do not have good judgment, then we start to go back into Walter Lippmann's theory of people being transmitters and interpreters. So if we apply in philosophy to recasting the news, then potentially the new golden age of journalism has only begun. Also, just to cast your mind, if we are creating journalists in Walter Lippmann's vision, then essentially we are highlighting a fundamental flaw in society's education, as we do not understand or have very little understanding of what the powers do. So the creation of Walter Lippmann's journalist is basically the fundamental flaw of education itself, and that actually inspires more of an elite class to rule over, and then you just have the elite class of society of the people that manage society and the people that explain society. So they sit very highly at the top, and the people at the bottom have very little understanding, however they are the actors of society. So let's look into the relationship of the media and the people who consume it. Now, I'd like to just say that sometimes people could have this perspective that using media can be a lens filter whereby you can see things from a different perspective, a different vision, and that can give you a better understanding of reality. However, you could say the same thing of taking drugs. If you heard a journalist speak to you, they would say that they are there to serve the public interest. However, you could say, well, what is the public's interest? And is the public's interest good? We've created models in our system whereby people have degrees of education, degrees of expertise. However, this all does create isolation of thinking. How many times do you find that a journalist is providing the facts and is providing you a logical, reasoned, proofed theory of a news article? So you would state that this is essentially a relationship of trust. There needs to be consistency, benevolence, surveillance, accountability, and essentially they're mixing up the mob versus the oligarchy, or the voters versus the Senate. Now remember, if you are a journalist, there are three main areas in which you can persuade your audience. So ethos, to give out credibility and trust, confidence; pathos, to convey emotional values, storytelling and language; and logos, to provide reason and proof. So on the ethos side, you can see that there is a well-dressed presenter who is conveying their voice with some kind of authority. Then you have the pathos, so you may have some emotional story which is being compelled. There is the tool of language, which can be manipulated to use to persuade anything. You can use rhetoric and relativism to get somebody on your side. And yeah, obviously the relationship of logic, reason, proof, evidence is somewhat lacking. You find nowadays that there is a lack of research, finding credible sources. Usually you find that people are just taking off one news agency, say like Reuters, and then repeating that. And obviously you're just getting some kind of Chinese whispers of one source of information that can just be countered in different views of how that's being focused upon the lens. News does stand for news, so people do want to give out the information as soon as possible to get the clicks, to get the views. However, the lack of research that's backing this information does create too much in the way of conspiracy theories, and people essentially want to seek out the truth. It's not being discovered with this pool of massive amounts of information that is being thrown out there without the credible sources. So I'm sort of channeling two sides. So there is obviously the old establishment media, and you've got the new media. So the old establishment media does probably have a bit more resources in terms of finding credible sources. However, their credibility has been deconstructed by the fact that they have a power relationship with politicians. On the other side, we do have the new media who doesn't have the resources to find the credible information. However, they can try and seek out the truth to more of a certain degree. Also, they do have the ability to offer more in the way of logic and reason to guide how to think on a subject. So the state of the corporate media is a lot more about sensationalism, how to get the gossip of the celebrities, rather than to discover what is going on behind doors in political offices. I think people are fairly aware of what is going on in terms of propaganda by the corporate media. They understand that there is power and corruption, there is restrictions of the news. On a day where lots of bad news is being released, the politicians will try to slip all of the news on that day. And when there is a day when all the media has the focus, then they will not release any information at all. Where there is the power, you can always shift things to your advantage. So essentially there is political bias, there is political correctness, there is avoidance of issues, there is a inlet and outlet of certain issues, there is impartiality, language, and the image. So either knowingly or unknowingly, people are trying to read information, and let's just say the majority are trying to decipher truth from falsehood. However, the problem leads to the fact that people will end up choosing what they want to believe in. And unfortunately, under psychology, people have an inclination to trust power. So, how may things develop in the future? Now, it's interesting how, as the knowledge has spread out, everybody can access information. It is widely available. So people needn't have all knowledge, and really there isn't a massive need for expertise in a field as much as there was in the past. However, what is becoming more important is for people to have good judgment. So this goes back to the idea that rather than the journalists having the filter, it is up to the people having the filter to deliberate information. So looking at the landscape and what's been going on in the market, we can actually look at what may be the future developments of media itself. So I guess this is journalism, the corporate media, and social media at the same time. A common trend which we will be seeing is a decline in the big mega corporations, the media juggernauts which are out there at the moment. And we'll also expect more of a decentralized news network. You may think that this polarizes opinion, so we have hundreds of different ways to do things and we're just all flying around, not getting to any point. But this is opposed to the two-channel dichotomy which we do have in the political fields right now. You are almost envisaging that we are freeing up the idea space of government. This is not just a one-way street, this is a two-way street in which there is the filter which is passing light through it, but also reflecting back towards the government itself. It's a cauldron of ideas, and you may expect that the best ideas would rise to the top. Obviously, philosophers could say that people have got the mob mentality, and maybe there could just be some very quick, ill thought out ideas like to, say, bring back the death penalty, and very dramatic, draconian ideas which could rise to the top. However, if you do have a way in which judgment or reason, evidence, how to have clear thinking is the ethical thinking of the journalist, rather than the idea of filtering and channeling ideas. This will be more of a revolution in terms of journalism. Now, going back to Walter Lippmann and John Dewey, you almost are saying there's emergence of journalism between the two. You are fundamentally creating many versions of Walter Lippmann's ideas of you pursuing different ideas. You're channeling the airways, you are converting opinion, but you're actually applying a bit more of John Dewey's ideas inside that for people to cast good judgments within these different filter phases that you're putting through. Now, a problem occurs when all of these ideas are casted. How does the best judgment rise to the top? Also, another thing to consider is that there is a competition for ideas, and bad ideas can potentially go to the top. Firstly, you could say that there is the corporate worlds which will hush any strong ideas which would push back the major corporations or any collusions of power. You have majority politics and political correctiveness. There will be spiritualism communities, you have scientific communities, all competing for the attention of the airwaves. One of the interesting things when it comes to relativism, the story is a lot more compelling. It does drive you a lot more compared to a scientist providing evidence and then logical conclusions. In the future, I believe that there will be an emphasis on impartiality on the news, very good research-backed information, but also what we are having with more individuals voicing opinions and shedding filters on different aspects of thought is multiple people who are passing judgments on the back of highly audited news sources. We're almost going to get in journalism a draw line down the middle. There's going to be a new type of journalist which is very scientific based, purely data driven, and how to model information in the correct way and manner. Basically researches all of its information and fact checks everything. There is a website called Fact Check itself. On the other side, you're going to get a number of different voices. This is usually going to be individuals who are passing judgment or casting judgment and swaying public opinion based upon their ideas of how that news can be interpreted. Now, I would imagine the ones who are the most helpful, the ones that can make people think better and make people understand better, will come to the forefront rather than the ones who are setting out ideologies. So rather than lens filters, we'll find that there'll be lens breakers smashing down ideologies and enabling people to have a clear vision. The idea space of governance would now be back in the hands of the individual who has power based upon how virtuous they are. So it's becoming a little bit more like the people who come to the forefront are the ones who provide the most value by passing the tools of good decision making back to the consumer. It's almost like the truthers or the truth exposers or the truth enablers, the ones that enable people to see through the cloud and fog of rhetoric. However, we come to another situation here whereby we may have these decentralized truthers or truth enablers. They may be in a position of a lot of power now, seeing that they hold all the people's minds or mindsets into a channeled way of thinking. So we're going to see another version of the free market where you'll get some people that rise to the top, they get too power hungry and then they collapse and fall, and then they get replaced by the more trustworthy truthers. So in the future, whereby there was people at the top of the tree or in the chairboard who were manipulating how the news would be presented, essentially the presenter of the news or somebody is going to be at the forefront of the news now. The creative ideas are all within the actual presenter itself, which is good for self-management. There wouldn't be so much bureaucracy to get something done. So when somebody is autonomous and has freedom of expression to produce all of their creative ideas into one channel, this is a massive advantage for the presenter, but it does have some pitfalls for the audience. So the journalism of the future may have a reversal of the inlet and outlet of questions and responses and conclusions rather than the journalist offering all the conclusions. Maybe the journalist is more so the question asker and it's for the audience to come to the conclusion. You may say that there is impartiality, but the way things are worded, you do get slightly channeled with most journalism articles from newscasters. But it would be very interesting if a journalist was to provide information and then state that this is the logical conclusion based upon all of this evidence. However, he's open to suggestions and there is these questions that lie and remain. Maybe the journalist is a deductive journalist and obviously this is a little bit tricky to do, but they could offer these are all the deductions from all of the evidence, so therefore these are potentially some of the conclusions. However, you will not have this format where it could be just like wham bam, thank you ma'am, here is all the information and here's the conclusion. Taking in news in the future will be much more of a timely affair and almost like a study learning exercise. I guess a majority of the journalists could start to say, why has this always been done this way? Where is this going to lead us in the future? Giving us a holistic view of logical paths. Also, one thing to remember, when somebody becomes so powerful, it's always going to be more preferable that those powerful journalists do have opposition and is willing to take on that opposition in debate. Maybe a interesting part of journalism is that there would be more of a auditorium in which journalists could duke it out. Rather than just the journalist is in a speaker situation directly to its audience, it has to go out, seek the other journalist and compete to enlighten the audience with the best logical conclusions for the betterment of humanity. The best journalists will want to have the strongest opposition in debate, as it is vital for them both to learn. So you hope there wouldn't be a load of people pinning all their hopes of success on one individual, one journalist, one politician, but a number of journalists who are putting forth ideas, conclusions, raising questions, and the individual people will jump from one side to the other if the reason, evidence, and logic is conclusive. So to conclude on my side, it's interesting how from the minority comes the best ideas. Majority politics may be a thing of the past, as the majority is usually a big loafish channel of communication which is always continually whipped at the edges until you really get this very politically correct, non-evasive, non-decisive movement. Problems occur usually when we come to the wrong conclusion before asking the right questions. As good ideas are suppressed, the majority is a diluted vision which appeases to the masses, then there is disconnect throughout the entirety of the nation. And particularly in the corporate world where you have shareholders isolated from the consequences of their own personal interest by selecting dividends and share prices over getting what's best for society. So to summarize, it is almost like journalism was a gigantic disconnect of give us what we want rather than give us what we need. And now we're seeing this earthquake which is crushing down the structures of journalism and being replaced by this new age of interconnection. The important question to ask of journalism is, should a journalist go where the reader directs them rather than the journalist suggests? If you go for the first option, it is essentially fast food news, and fast food news eventually consumes us, and we get really just stuck on celebrities, money, and gossip. However, if we consider a journalist to be like a dietitian, providing us nourishing food, then there is a reciprocal benefit which is occurring. A journalist of the future may be like a personal dietitian and state what are your personal goals, where do you want to be in the future, how enlightened do you want to be. Maybe you tick some boxes, then the journalist will take you on a certain learning path, on a certain narrative. Cultivating culture can be a very dangerous thing. It can lead us to fantasize about becoming rich or a talentless celebrity without ever having the knowledge or the need to put in the effort to actually attain that in the first place. The interesting change which has happened upon society is that it was always the nation's news, and now it's becoming your news. You decide how you would like your content delivered. It does create more interesting individuals of society and more of a basis to share ideas. There is a certain blending in society where people are actually gaining power, they're gaining an idea of their own mindsets, they're almost becoming a journalist, a politician, they're self-guiding their own lives. Everybody is becoming more empowered with these new communication channels. It's up to everybody for logic, evidence, truth, and reason to clamber above the ill-conceived ideas. So, thank you very much for your time. If you find this podcaster is providing you any value, please subscribe and I shall be back again for more. Thank you again.